Call to order the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting of Monday, August 29th, 2022. Where is my microphone? Oh, that's Kathy.
I think
It's up there. Sorry. Do you want me to say that again? All right. I call to order the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting of Monday, August 29th, 2022. It's 6 p.m. and present are myself, Eleni Constantine, Kathy Green, Angela Dye, Todd Brown, and Charles Dalton. And for staff, we have Ron, Phil, Ally, and Piper. And we have our town council liaison, Dan Enright. And I want to start this meeting by thanking staff for allowing us to move it to today, because I know it's extra work for all of you. So thanks a lot, because now we can all be here and consider this important project. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is approve the minutes. I was the only person present at the P&G chair meeting, so I moved to approve the minutes of the P&Z chair meeting dated July 22nd, 2022, but I guess somebody else will have to second and we have to vote.
I'll second.
Thank you, Kathy. All in favor? Yes, good, unanimous. And now we have also the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Thank you, Kathy.
I move to approve the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting minutes of the 28th of July, 2022 as presented. A second.
Thank you, Angela. All in favor? Yes. All right, moving on. Staff announcements. Ron, Phil, Ally?
Don't have any staff announcement.
None
for me.
None for me. Good. Is there any public comment on non-agenda items? Do we have members of the public present? I can't see.
Yeah.
I think we do.
I don't think he's got his hand up though.
All right, so hearing none, we'll move on to our public hearing item. So our first public hearing item is the Phoenix Market PUD and parking payment in lieu. This is a review by the Planning and Zoning Commission regarding a preliminary small-scale PUD, requesting 2 PUD variations pursuant to LUC Article 6, Division 3, including the following variations. 1, an increase in height from 35 feet to a maximum height of 39.5 feet. And 2, a 50% reduction in the amount of parking required for the project. The applicant is requesting to provide 3 parking spaces where 5 are required, and a request for a payment in lieu of 2 parking spaces. The legal description is Lot 29, Block 3, Town of Telluride, according to the plat recorded September 6, 1883, and Plat Book 28, page 1. Address 221 West Colorado Avenue, Zone District Historic Commercial, owner New Sheridan Restaurants, LLC. Applicant Ray Farnsworth, the manager of New Sheridan Restaurants, and our staff member is Phil. Phil, would you like to present this project to us?
I would, thank you. Okay, good evening, everybody. As introduced, this is a presentation on a preliminary PUD and a payment in lieu. Again, the applicants are requesting a maximum height of 39.5 feet and a 50% reduction in parking through the PUD process, and a separate application for a payment in lieu of 2 parking spaces.
Phil,
So-
let the record reflect that Commissioner Bettman has joined us.
Perfect timing. Some background facts that weren't already addressed. This is within the Historic Landmark District. It is located in Flood Hazard Zone AO, and the existing building on site is rated as contributing. So a brief introduction to the proposal is the applicant intends to construct 3 new accommodations units, 2 affordable housing units, and low-intensity commercial on the ground floor. You can see the square footage breakdowns of those proposed uses here. Approximately 990 square feet of affordable housing, about 2,700 square feet for the accommodations units, and 1,000 square feet of commercial on the ground floor, which is required per the land use code. Again, here's a table of the variations requested. The maximum height in the zone district by right is 35 feet. And for all of these uses as proposed, 5 parking spaces would be required. So when we think about the requested height, it's important to look at what's being proposed. It's clear to us that the applicant is trying to have minimal connections to the existing building by building the addition towards the back of the lot, not on top of the existing structure. This will certainly help maintain the historic appearance as it exists today. Here's a section view for the proposed addition. One second. The third story steps back approximately 5 feet from the alley, and the upper floor steps back approximately 7 feet. We're not talking about setbacks or building design today, but I do think it's important to show how the addition may relate to the existing alley. If this PUD is approved, these plans will most likely change. It's also important to consider compatibility with existing buildings in the area. So the Phoenix Market building as it sits today is approximately 19.5 feet tall. One of the shortest buildings on Colorado Avenue. A lot of buildings in the area have already had additions added on over the years. This is a table provided by the applicant that shows elevations for existing buildings and building heights. It's important to point out that the Bell building has not constructed an addition yet, but does have approval to do so. So now switching to the second request through the PUD process, which is a 50% reduction in the amount of parking provided. This table here shows the parking requirements for all proposed uses on site. And it's important to point out that through the PUD process, you can only request a 50% reduction. So that is what they're doing. You cannot reduce it by more than 50% through the PUD process. So if a 50% reduction is granted, that would leave the applicant with 2.5 parking spaces, which would then be 3 parking spaces, because fractional parking spaces are always rounded up to the nearest full parking space. So you can now see a list of PUD public benefits from the land use code. And section 6304C states that P&Z may authorize variations such as those requested by the applicant when in its sole discretion, it is determined that granting the variation will enable the applicant to accomplish one or more of the following, which would otherwise not be achieved or required by applicable land use regulations. So with this project, the applicants are proposing 3 short-term accommodations for visitors, which clearly meets section 6304C5. And they are providing approximately 900 square feet of affordable housing, which meets 6304C3. Per the land use code, they'd be required to provide about 158 square feet of housing. And they're proposing about 997 with this application, which is considerable. And per the land use code, they only need to meet one or more of the following. So they don't need to check all of these boxes, just one or more. One thing about the affordable housing being proposed is one of the housing units within the basement. So if the PUD is approved and the housing remains in the basement, the applicant will be required to go through a public process with the Telluride Housing Authority to ask for an exception to allow the unit in the basement. So moving on towards the PUD review standards, staff have discussed these in the staff report. I'm not going to go in through them one by one. In general, we think the proposal meets these standards. We have concerns about parking, which we've discussed in the staff report. We'll discuss a little later today. But in general, the PUD being proposed meets these standards. So at the time of updating this presentation, we received 4 public comments. I believe you guys have received 5 total. 1 letter of support came at about 3 p.m. this afternoon. And in general, the public comments were in support of the project. A few comments had very specific questions. Some of those questions were about the trash enclosure or the alley setbacks, the height of the addition, the location of the deed restricted housing, and the lack of parking. So we're not reviewing the trash enclosure today. We're also not discussing alley setbacks. But those were the comments topics that we received things on. So to summarize the PUD request, it does meet the standards under 6313. They do meet the standards for public benefits. 997 square feet of housing is being provided. And all of the uses proposed are uses by right in the historic commercial zone district. Now, the 50% reduction in parking has been requested, which brings the requirement to 3. The next section, we're going to talk about the payment in lieu, which would, if approved, reduce parking on site to 1 space. And staff has concerns about this public benefit being diminished by not providing parking and the housing being located in the basement. So the second part of this presentation is specific about the request for a payment in lieu to buy out 2 required parking spaces. The photo seen here is the site plan for what exists currently. There is 1 parking space shown here with a trash area and an open courtyard. So this is the proposed site plan for the additions. You can see the additions taking up most of the space that is currently open in the back. And again, you can see a table for the parking requirements totaling 5 parking spaces. Staff had a difficult time with this request. We think that if you're providing 2 affordable housing units, you should be providing a parking space for each one. Here are the review standards for payments in lieu of parking. Per the land use code, it states that P&Z may permit an application or an applicant to make a payment in lieu of providing parking on a lot or parcel and choose the following criteria to guide its decision. So these are guidelines. They don't necessarily all have to be met to approve, but used to guide your decision. So staff believe this request for payment in lieu meets 2 of the 5 review criteria. 6114A1 states that the applicant demonstrates that all required parking cannot be located on site. They have demonstrated that, but largely because of how their design is, not because the site has specific constraints that don't allow it. 6114A2 states whether the historic significance of an existing building or other site feature would be adversely affected. There is a rated structure on site rated as contributing. It's impossible for me to say if the existing building would be affected by parking on site, but there is a historic building that is not going to move. And then the other criteria that we really think is met with this proposal is 114A3. The subject property is in close proximity to transportation routes and permanent public parking. 6114A4 talks about proposed uses that work to reduce parking requirements. The applicants are proposing to remove a restaurant use that has 0 parking requirement to replace it with a low intensity commercial, which is actually increasing their parking requirements. So this proposal is in opposition to 6114A4. So again, here are the review criteria for payment in lieu of parking. We think 114A2 and 114A3 are generally meeting these criteria. At the HARC meeting on August 17th, HARC voted to unanimously recommend approval of the PUD application. They accepted all of staff's proposed conditions in the motion except condition C1, which they did not accept, that required a physical on-site parking space for each housing unit. HARC did not review the payment in lieu request because that's not something that they make recommendations on. So as many of you probably know, you can approve with conditions, request a continuance or denial of this application. If you guys are leaning towards recommendations of approval, staff have provided proposed motions for approval in the staff report. They have not changed since the HARC meeting. We've kept all the same conditions of approval that was in the staff report for the HARC meeting and has not changed. So we're still recommending a parking space be provided for each housing unit. So here's the P&Z proposed motion for the PUD. Again, it would approve a maximum height of 39.5 feet and a 50% reduction in parking. With the conditions seen here, that they would provide 3 accommodations units. These are the public benefits that would be required. Provide at least 997 square feet of housing and physical on-site parking for each housing unit. And this is the proposed motion for the payment in lieu. Staff is recommending a payment in lieu of one of the 2 parking spaces being requested. This would effectively waive the parking requirements for the accommodations uses and the commercial use, but would still require on-site parking for the housing units. Happy to answer any questions. I know the applicant also has a presentation, so thank you.
I'm sure we have some, anybody have any questions before we have me? All right, I'll go next. Okay, I'll go first. What's the amount of the commercial space now?
I'm not sure.
Are they proposing to reduce it?
I think yes, only because some of the commercial space now is used for kitchen space, which is not going to be commercial space moving forward.
Does the back space count where people sit and eat? Commercial space?
The
No.
outside space?
The patio? The patio. It's partly-
No.
Okay. Also, so this is a contributing building. Would they be permitted to build on top of it?
I think they probably would. That's, obviously a HARC purview thing. In the meeting on the 17th, members of HARC were appreciative of what was being proposed, but I think you could build on top of it.
Okay, those are all my questions, Charles.
Okay, so just on the affordable unit below grade, I mean, is that in our purview to say we like that or not like that, or is that strictly goes to the housing authority? Or do we kind of get to say how much of a benefit?
I think weighing out the benefit is certainly in your purview.
Okay.
If they go through this process and indeed restrict them per the housing guidelines, which we would require if they're providing affordable housing units, then it would really be up to the Target Housing Authority to say if it's okay with them that it's in the basement.
Okay.
And so it'd probably be a condition of approval that, if they can't get the housing approved or the waiver granted through the housing authority, then the PUD would not move forward. Okay.
Oh, on that, I have actually another question. It's not in the flood zone, is it?
It is.
It is in the flood zone.
Since it is in the flood zone, why is there a housing unit below the flood level?
Great question. I believe they are allowed to put housing in the flood zone because it's in addition to a historic building. You couldn't build a new home and put a housing unit in the flood zone, but I believe in addition to a historic building does allow that.
I thought it could only go under the historic building.
Well, it's going to be connected, so I think that counts.
In the past,
Hmm.
you could have your basement under the historic part, but not necessarily under a new part of a building.
Okay, I mean, we can certainly look into it. I know we've had a lot of conversations with building official about it, and they seem to be fine if it's connected, but I'm happy to look into it for sure.
But even so, that's not part of.
Did you have a question for Phil?
No.
Sorry. Angela?
Yeah, I was gonna ask what kind of daylighting there is for that unit. Is it just window wells?
I think the applicants would be the more suited to answer these
Okay.
questions. We haven't really gotten to building design or review of any of that yet.
Okay, I'm
But-
just wondering, that's one of the requirements, so
Yes.
that's why I just
Yes.
wanted to know that. And then thank you for doing that profile to show the varying heights, because that was gonna be one of my questions about how high is everything else in relative, and is that 39.5 request reasonable? So this unit is in the patio space, basically, right?
Yes.
Which was, if I recall, excavated because it was full of a debris flow. from Cornet Creek at one point?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay. That was, I thought, if anybody knows, maybe the applicant fill us in.
Any other questions?
Yeah, you're requesting that they provide a space for each of those units. Maybe this is a question for the applicant, but where would the second space go?
It's up to them to design it.
Correct.
Okay, so it's not an obvious piece of their spot.
No.
Any other questions for Phil? All right, let's hear from the applicant.
Hi, good evening. Chris Hawkins with Alpine Planning.
I sit here, you guys see the screen?
Yep, I think so. Sit down.
Be fine,
Yep.
yeah.
Hi, I'm Ray Farnsworth with the New Sheridan.
And glad to have a Monday meeting. Glad it's not every Monday, though, because Mondays are bad enough. But anyway, thank you for your time this evening. To get the presentation started, Ray is the applicant on this, and I think all Ray, so Ray's going to speak a little bit at first, then I'll hop in after.
Good evening, everyone. Our historic building located at 221 West Colorado Avenue was originally built by electricity tycoon and philanthropist L.L. Nunn in the year 1892. In its early days, it housed the Phoenix Market, which provided meat, fish, vegetables, and other necessities to the early miners and residents of Telluride. Nearly 125 years later, the calamities brought by the harsh weather at 8,750 feet had taken their toll, and the building was near collapse. We purchased the building in 2016 and began a major rehabilitation at considerable cost that remains a significant public benefit, with a new foundation, roof, and related improvements. The property evolution continues as we have proposed to the town a rear addition of hotel rooms and employee housing units. The Phoenix Bean has been a labor of love. Since 2016, we have operated our historic building in its current incarnation as an affordable coffee shop, diner, and music venue, as we have contemplated our long-term plans for the property and a rear addition. Now that those plans are in place, we have entered into a long-term lease of the interior of our building to a much loved and respected business, Telluride Outside, Telluride's premier guide service since 1984. Honestly, much of our decision to change the use of our building is due to the lack of staffing that persists in our area and elsewhere. But we need to ensure that we remain competitive, and part of our approach to ensuring that is to build employee housing so that we can continue to keep our venues staffed. The lack of affordable housing of rental units in our area is at a crisis level, and all businesses in Telluride continue to struggle to staff their businesses. Yes, businesses across the country are also short-staffed, but in Telluride, this problem is exacerbated by our having inadequate price-capped affordable housing rental units. With little fanfare, we will close the current Phoenix Bean after Blues and Brews and begin preparing the interior of the building for Telluride Outside. We're excited about the continued evolution of this historic property and its significance to the Telluride community, and will continue to steward the Phoenix Market building. We are before you this evening to discuss our PUD application. We want to provide additional public benefits with our property by building hotel suites and employee housing. We're asking for a reasonable height variance and a reasonable reduced parking variance. We received unanimous approval from HARC last week and for this PUD application, and we are hoping for your support this evening. This is an important project for the town, and we trust you will agree that the public benefits we are offering far outweigh any parking concerns. Finally, parking in the G district of town is not problematic. The new Sheridan has an agreement in place with the town that allows our hotel guests to park in the G district. And my hotel guests never have difficulty finding parking. We have letters of support from our neighbors who agree. My employees who will rent these affordable apartments from us will most likely not have a car, as they will live in town and work next door at the Sheridan. I believe our PUD application deserves approval, and we thank you for your time and consideration.
So just a little bit of the history of this property. This was in the narrative, but it's a very historic building. And that historic form that you see evolved from a small 25 by 40 foot footprint in 1893 to 1899, having a 25 foot by 68 foot footprint that was restored by the hotel owner. And there's been lots of uses: a grocery, meat market, coffee shop, and restaurant. So the parking has changed over time from retail basically to restaurant, and now it's going back to more of a retail use. So that 2016 building rehabilitation was just done out of love of that property and also to stabilize the building, obviously. And that cost over $716,000 that we believe remains a significant public benefit. And then there's a 2008 new Sheridan replat that further tied these properties a little bit together with a egress easement out of the back of the property. I'll show you in a little bit. It's basically a 3-foot ingress and egress easement that is really wider than that because of the stairs out the back that go out basically out the back of the pool room. The site is very constrained due to that ingress and egress easement, the historic commercial footprint that basically goes 68 feet deep. And there's flood structural walls in the back. This was done some time ago. And that's actually why when you are walking in from the alley, you go upstairs and downstairs because that flood wall was built up to push back the historic flood levels that are shown on the map. So that courtyard was not built, due to a flood. It was basically built as part of this whole planned redevelopment of the property. There's also a 5-foot alley setback. This map shows the historic building footprint. There was a non-historic addition that will be removed from the building. This is basically what's encumbered by the ingress and egress easement. And then this is basically the flood structural wall comes across here where you step up and then it goes to this part over and back. So that's in place. And a big part of this redevelopment plan working is using that and keeping that structural flood wall in place and the ability to design a building around it. That's one of the constraints of providing an additional parking space outside of some of the other project goals I'll talk about in a minute. So again, this addition is an evolution of the property. And one of the key design considerations was avoiding any impacts to that historic building form. And I know this came from Sherry after working with her for many years on art. But historic preservation of a building form is a public benefit, especially when you can do a Shanghai Palace type rooftop addition. That's clear. And so we were asking for that to be counted as one of the PUD public benefits. And I think it's an important one given the building's status. Again, everyone agreed it's much better status. The floor area ratio, we're just asking for a little bit higher. And that's due to the short-term accommodations and employee housing uses. That's not a PUD variation. It's just allowed if you do those uses. And so you can go up from 1.5 to 1. We're actually seeking 1.67 to 1. We're also seeking the building height, which is per the PUD from 39.6 to 35 feet pursuant to the PUD, and also a decrease of on-site parking, which we're talking about and is probably the main subject of the conversation tonight. Again, the PUD purpose is innovative site planning, flexibility in the applications of the town's development standards, preservation to preserve its site's historic features. We're certainly doing that with this project, even though it doesn't have to be done. And also getting height and parking standards varied. The Phoenix building form is that basically gable form in the back and the front commercial facade. That's the part that Sherry designed this building around. And when you look at all those constraints, you get a really small footprint in the back. And instead of going on top, it's going up. And the park was remarkably comfortable with the height and feeling it was compatible. And it's also been designed with the topographic change because there's actually quite a bit of change from the front of the store to the alley. That's why when you're back in the back, but when you're at that back level, it's almost pretty close to the pool hall where that ingress is coming out. So it's quite a bit of change overall. And also this building has been designed with a lot of input from code consultants and the town's building official and Sherry on making sure it meets building code egress requirements, which is that back egress stair that comes out where there can't be a parking space if you're pushing the building to the back. If a parking space comes in, then all of a sudden you have to put your egress someplace, and you're looking more beginning to impact that historic building form. The heights, Phil already went through this, so I'm not going to repeat that. The public benefits you're aware of, and the affordable housing units, I want to talk about this a little bit. They're really mezzanine level units. They're not true basement units, and I'm going to show this in a minute. And we will seek an exception from the Telluride Housing Authority Subcommittee. We haven't talked about timing of that, but certainly would want to get that done fairly quickly, probably even before we get a PUD agreement in place, just to make sure there's no issues. And again, Ray's already made the case for housing, and you're all aware of it. This yellow highlighted area is the area that's on the lowest level that's exposed to daylight. There is an upper level deck that comes across here, but this is not a basement wall. The basement wall basically begins someplace in here around the back and this side, and then there's an elevator on this side that's not part of the basement wall. We still need to do the calculations, I think, to make sure it meets the definition of a basement before it or as a part of that Telluride Housing Authority Subcommittee meeting. But there's a lot of daylight coming in here, and you can see the egress coming out, windows, door. There's quite a bit of light and air coming into this housing unit on two sides. And then you have the pool hall level coming in right here, stepping down 2 steps, coming over, and then the egress out. So just a relationship. If you've been hanging out back behind the pool hall lately, you can understand that relationship. The building heights, Phil already showed this, very compatible form. And then the PUD design compliance, I've already talked about this. Again, this is just a sensitive subordinate addition. It's set back over 100 feet from the main facade. It's quite a bit back there. The parking that's provided, you understand, where there's 5 spaces, we're requesting a reduction of 2, parking payment in lieu for 2, and the remaining of 1 site, basically 1 site on 1 parking space on site. It's, this is a really narrow margin project, and I know that's not your concern. 3 lodging units and, or sorry, 3 lodging units and 2 affordable housing units. That's it. There's a huge expense to build this. And if you have to get in there and take out flood walls and do all this stuff, it changes that calculation pretty quickly. And so even though that's not your concern, it really changes. It's already a very low financial return. And so both the affordable housing units can get a G permit. They're allowed to. There's 1 on site. And the intent here, and we'll put this in the covenants, is both spaces will be able to use that in the shared use. 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, communicate. If you have to go up and get groceries or come back and park, and there may not even be a need for it because that employee may come from out of town working seasonally, and they don't even need a parking space because they're working for the hotel, which is right next door. But the idea is it's a shared use parking space. So to say that both units won't have a parking space on site is not true. They won't full time, but they will 2 weeks out of the month. And if they communicate, I almost look at like it's a valet parking, and it's not perfect, but it still is better than not having any parking on site, in our opinion. So Ray already talked about the G permit agreement and the 26 guest rooms. This really relates to the accommodations because the hotel units will be operated through a hotel operating agreement with the Sheraton. So it's seamless for the clients. They're still going to check in up front, and then they're going to have their bags relayed to the back, etc. So they're still going to go park like the other guests. They're going to go up front to dine, etc. It's going to be seamless to the guests. So that takes care of that. I think the G permit showing that there's no issue in parking, the same would be true for that affordable housing unit. And
you touch on that informal study that we did?
Oh yeah, sorry. There was an informal study that Ray did. I breezed right past that, where in the summer, 40%, or sorry, in the winter, 40% of the guests drive a vehicle and 60% arrive by truck, by mass transit. And that gets flipped in the summer. So in the summer, 60% arrive by vehicles, 40% by van shuttle service out of Montrose or
So to
other.
underscore that, what I'm explaining is that of the 26G permits that were allotted, it's rare to use more than 60% of those. And I think that, again, just underscores that parking is ample in the G district area. And as Chris said, this shared parking approach to the 2 employee housing units, in my mind, is perfectly adequate.
So this isn't perfect. We think the public benefits, because you only have to meet one of those, as Phil said earlier. And we feel the PUD could be approved just with the historic preservation or just with the 3 lodging units. But now if we have to get rid of one of the affordable housing units, that's not really gonna, that doesn't help the hotel with employees. But it will meet the literal requirement to have on-site parking in everyone's mind. But everyone, including the developers, would rather have the parking, at least one on-site and then one off-site. And there's still the strong public benefits. And we feel like, again, I know this is one of those weighing tests, is it enough to approve it or not? But if you only need one and we have 2, and we're still providing over double the required housing mitigation, even if we get rid of one of the affordable housing units, I still think we're meeting the PUD public benefit test. But that's why you guys make that call up here. That's just my opinion, but it's still a pretty strong PUD in my opinion, with still, 300, basically at 381 square feet of housing available.
In addition to what the mitigation requirement
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, correct. So Paul Steinberg's one of the partners in the hotel. I think he wanted to provide a few comments. Or not.
You there, Paul?
He's there.
It's on the screen.
Okay.
He's still muted.
I'm working.
Yeah, we know.
It's so nice to
Sorry,
meet in
didn't-
person,
no
by the way.
pressure.
Thank you.
Hello,
Hey, Paul.
hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, I don't want to repeat much, but I just think we'd like for you to consider that there's a greater public benefit in providing more affordable housing over parking. But we're happy, again, here to talk about reducing one of these units to comply with parking, but don't think that serves Telluride the best in the long run.
So the HARC approval, just a few quotes that I got off the record. This was from 2 different HARC members. It's really a parking space or an affordable housing unit, which is more important to the community at large. A second housing unit right now, today in the town, is more critical than a parking space. And then another short, sweet one, affordable house trumps parking. But that was their opinion. I know they typically don't weigh in on that, but that was, at least we thought we'd share that with you. And so we're open to any questions you might have before you begin your deliberations. And
Great.
oh, sorry.
There were some questions brought up. that I
Right,
wanted to
yeah, thank you.
explain.
I'm sorry.
I wanted to explain my approach to the project. There have
Sherry,
been,
you didn't identify yourself at the beginning, so could you say your name and what your role is here?
sure, Sherry Harvey, architect. The Steinbergs and Ray approached me after having done another analysis with another architect on an addition that was on top of the building. Knowing my long-term on HARC and my sensitive approach to historic preservation, I've almost been too sensitive with the site. I wanted to point out some of the reasons behind this small footprint. And the first one is that the spatial relationship of the single-story building, the Sheridan to Main Street and the Bell Building characterize the property and its setting and enforce its contributing status. The setting would be compromised if we had to push the building over the historic building. The approach is so sensitive, it allows 6 feet of light and air to the existing historic Sheridan wall and to the beam. The standards for rehabilitation in the Secretary of Interior's guidelines. When you develop a rehabilitation plan, you characterize setting, location, design, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. The standards say new additions, exterior alterations, or rated new construction will not destroy the historic materials, features, and spatial relationships that characterize the properties. So these spatial relationships are something that I was trying to preserve. New additions and adjacent or related new construction will be undertaken in such a manner that, if removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of the historic property and its environment would be unimpaired. You can easily see how this would be achieved with this project. Within our own RE guidelines, I wanted to highlight the sentence on character. Talks about character being one of the visual aspects and physical features that comprise the appearance of every historic building. Character defining elements include the overall shape of the building, its materials, craftsmanship, decorative details, interior spaces and features, as well as the various aspects of its site and environment. So that was the reasoning behind keeping the footprint so small. With the existing egress easement, which is 6 feet into an already 25-foot wide space, we're down to 19 feet. Being a hotel use, we need 2 means of egress. With a second egress out the alley, there's literally not enough room for another parking spot back there. And that is the problem.
Can you show us that in the picture?
Yeah.
Sure. I don't know if the plans were included in your packet, but
Yeah.
it's literally a 19-foot wide by 30-foot wide footprint. A lot of it's eaten up by 2
Here's
stairwells.
the level that shows the parking egress.
So you can see here. We had 25 feet with the existing egress, and keep that because that's an easement for the people from the pool room to get out. We're down to 19 feet. With a stairwell at the back and a stairwell out the front, we are down to 12 feet. So we weren't able to fit another parking spot back there. You can't have it be hotel use. If you wanted it to be a private condo and only 1 means of egress, you could. But in order to meet the building code with 2 means of egress, it was impossible to fit 2 parking spots back there. The other,
Can I just,
sure.
can I ask a question now?
Well, wait.
Wait, let's wait.
Let Sherry
Okay.
finish.
Okay, I wanted to highlight how much of the footprint is eaten up by circulation space being a hotel use. My other point I wanted to make is that we have worked for 11 months with a code consultant. We've had many meetings with Sam and received the okay from Sam for the FEMA exemption to build housing at this basement level through the connection to the historic building. You're right, Kathy, and that was a red flag. But we've managed to read through the FEMA guidelines and meeting with both Phil and Ron and Jonna and Sam agreed that it would meet the requirements for the addition to the historic building. And lastly, I wanted to say if there were any neighbors listening, that we'd be happy to meet with them if they had any concerns, they couldn't understand the plans. And if you had any questions or concerns, if you could ask them of us before we close for deliberations.
I'm sure we have some questions. Charles, you seemed like you wanted to ask a question.
Well, I'm just on the stairwells. I guess I noticed like the Sheridan building has the old fire escape stairwell at the back where it,
That's the opera
That's
house.
the
or the opera house. Okay, but building code requires 2 full,
Yeah, 2 full
Two.
1 hour fire rated enclosed stairwells.
Okay.
We are not allowed to put a fire escape
Okay,
and use that
that's-
as, yeah, but it's a very good question.
Okay.
We tried. Code consultant shut us right down.
Todd?
The egress or access from the new structure to the rear can't be combined with that existing 3-foot?
No, and that's more than 3 feet. That's actually 6 feet.
Okay.
Um,
Can't,
No, it can't because it's open to the air and for the pool room. If you go down a level, do you have the plan before this? So this is the existing easement that the pool room gets to come out. You go around and then come back up. You can't combine a stairwell that accesses the units above that would scissor over that. You need to have the head height. You wouldn't get the head height on this level above that if you had to come up, go up another 2 feet and then out. And you can't enclose this existing stairwell. Once you're out to the open light and air, you have to stay out. You can't go outside and then back inside to get out again. That's another building code requirement. So it really does compromise the availability of the space in the back of the site. And we felt, seeing as the office was already built, wouldn't it be great to turn that into another affordable housing?
I think that was a question too, what's the square footage now versus after the change of use? So currently upstairs serves as storage for refrigeration, an employee bathroom, et cetera. And so that space we would like to convert to one of our 2 employee housing units that we are proposing. So that we kind of move, those square footage numbers from out of commercial and into employee housing, thereby reducing the commercial count.
So, okay, we finished up?
Yes, thank you.
I have some questions. So the amount of commercial space is reduced by exactly the amount of that's replaced by affordable housing?
Depends what you define as commercial space. In the building code, commercial space is literally the front, the retail space. The office upstairs, is kind of back of house space.
That's gross.
But that reduction also includes what is currently a kitchen that Telluride Outside will use as storage.
So that's going to be, does that count as commercial space now?
No,
Okay,
It counts as gross commercial space, but not net for purposes of parking. There's a difference between those two. So storage rooms just don't generate parking requirements.
okay.
So none of the front is gonna change. Bathrooms won't change. The front, the mercantile space that's open to the public is gonna stay.
So your application suggests that it's going to be a market, but actually it's going to be Telluride Outside?
Yeah,
Well, they're gonna
we
rent.
just wanted to recognize the main historic use of the building, which was the Phoenix Market Building. So we just called it the Phoenix Market Building PUD. That's all. We're just trying to give it a little bit more of a historic theme.
Okay, is Telluride Outside considered a service use or a retail use? Retail. I don't know the answer to that question. They provide all this.
Probably both if they sell stuff.
I think they sell enough stuff in
They
there
sell
that I would
stuff? All right,
call that retail.
They run tours, but that's-
okay. And I think this is my last question. Sherry, can you explain how the historic building might be affected by having the parking place? 'Cause I don't understand.
Well, that's why I was reading out of the Secretary of Interior's guidelines and those
Tell
7.
me.
I don't have a picture. So there's 7 principles that are highlighted in the Secretary of Interior standards for preservation. And they are, setting is number 1. So by keeping the 4 sides of this building exposed and visible preserves its setting. If you were to build on top of the building, you would lose the whole rear of the existing Phoenix Market, which on the Sanborn maps was a market. The back was some sort of smoke shed, which it still reads today as a rear addition. And if you built on top of that, that would totally go away. You wouldn't have any concept that there was an original market building, a small shed. We are preserving that and the space around it, as well as the space of the wall to the Sheridan. And I feel like that's another really big part of this project, which is compromised the space and made it even tighter by me not pushing up against the Sheridan and going lot line to lot line. It's reducing the size of these hotel rooms. So the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation include setting, location, design, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. Obviously, feeling and association are a little bit more vague, but actually, I would strike that. Feeling is, association isn't. And I opened by saying its association of being a small building to these taller buildings around it is something that we are also preserving. If you take this small building and make it a tall building, even if it's a stepped one, that's changing its association to its site.
Mhm.
So besides the Secretary of Interior's, I read from the guidelines, the definition of character. And that was the attempt when I chose not to build on top of the building, to maintain its character as a small building.
So.
Excuse me,
Go ahead.
you've used that term and so has David, building on top of, you're talking over
Right.
rather, rather than taking off the gable in the back and building on that structure.
No, it would be literally like that proposal that really anybody didn't like a long time ago. It'd be getting rid of this gable roof form and putting a flat roof form over it, just like Shanghai Palace. That is what we're talking about. that
Yeah,
would
but
be
Shanghai
allowed.
Palace did not have a gable form roof. It had a flat roof.
Yeah, there's a design guideline in that allows for these types of additions, and Hark acknowledged that this project could have an addition over. Hark said that last week, so.
There's no way to push the building. It would have to be on top. You can't have less than a 6-foot space between buildings. That's building code. When it's 2 buildings on 1 lot, there's an imaginary property line and 3-foot by code. So that was a given. If we tried to move the development towards the Phoenix building, it would build on the back of that. It would change the whole layout and the circulation and lose the sense of setting. That I just.
Angela.
Yeah, let's talk about where the parking space might be. I just was curious about, it is a question about consideration. You're showing 1 parking space, right? That
Right here.
X that we saw on the site plan.
It's right
Yep.
behind Sherry's head.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and the pool.
Sorry.
There we go.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's all right. And that the second affordable housing unit would get a G permit. That's
Right, through-
that's public parking on street in the neighborhood. in
Through
the
our
Z-
lease, they
G
go to
zone,
the
right?
marshals and obtain a G permit.
Okay, so your hotel guests also get that permit
Yes.
if they can't find a space in their,
The new system is that my staff enters the guest name and license plate number.
Mhm.
And then the town reads it with their scanners and understands that it's a hotel guest.
Right.
And so we have 26 of those, but my research shows that it's rare that all 26 are used. And in addition, yes, Angela, my employees can obtain a G permit through the town because of their lease with me and the employee housing unit.
okay. Is there anything that guarantees that in your proposal? That the second unit would get that G permit?
Well, it's a right as a renter in the G permit district. You're allowed to receive a G permit from the town of Telluride.
Okay, so that's through the town of Telluride rules. That's all that.
Can I kind of
Yes.
follow up with, are you,
Yeah, go ahead.
okay, so the new Sheridan gets 26 G permits, I guess, and is that number set by some standard?
And we have 26 guest rooms.
Okay. And I guess I'm wondering if if we said, hey, the hotel only gets 24 and the 2 of them go to the affordable housing unit, so it'd still be a total of 27, 26. That wouldn't change the parking demand in the neighborhood if it was
I
that way.
mentioned that idea to Lance and I think Phil and Ron and I maybe have talked about it, but I think that Lance's suggestion was that we not revisit the 26 G permit agreement from 1993. And that this project needed to kind of stand alone and support its own parking. But my point in bringing up that the 26 G permits aren't typically all used is to just paint the picture in the G district area that parking is sufficient, and the concern about 1 parking spot in this project, I think the employee housing and hot goods trumps by far. I'd also like to point out that, recently Excelsior Cafe became Patagonia and there was no trigger for a parking spot for a commercial, and the Voodoo Lounge, I think, doesn't require a parking spot for their commercial. And I think that you can make exceptions, and exceptions have been made. And I think the merits of this project far outweigh your concern about a perceived lack of 1 parking spot. And as Chris has also pointed out, that the tandem idea to share that parking spot, I think is completely reasonable. And for all these reasons, I think that you should approve our PUD application.
Any questions?
Dan.
Yes, Dan.
Like to provide a quick reminder that Png is of course able to provide their own direction outside of staff advice
Thank you.
as you well.
Thank you for that helpful reminder. So I have a question for, I guess, well, any of you. What type of hotel units are these above? I mean, you have some plans here, but this is not the final. Are they more like condos? Are they more like hotel rooms? They're
Hotel suites, I would describe them as, where they would have 2 king beds in each bedroom, so 2-bedroom decks, nice hotel suites that would complement the hotel rooms that we have at the new Sheraton. And as Chris said, we would operate from the new Sheraton with guests checking in at the hotel front desk. And so, yeah, quite nice hotel suites are what we're envisioning.
Thanks. Are there any other questions for the applicant or applicants? All right.
I'm just
Yes.
one quick question, Ray, how does this particular these accommodations on the new side compared to the accommodations on the other side?
Well, obviously, the 26 rooms at the new Sheraton are historic. But, you know, we worked hard with our renovations over the years, and in our 2008 remodel, the wainscot in the historic hallways and the grand staircase and those historic features are all intact, but interior to the walls, it had been such a jumble over the years that we were allowed to retain the same number of net rooms, 26, but we provided a full bath in each bathroom because as recently as 2008, the new Sheraton Hotel had shared bathrooms with some of our guest rooms. And so we put a lot of money into remodeling the new Sheraton. And so, similar care will be taken with these additional hotel suites to ensure that aesthetically they complement the hotel rooms at the new Sheraton. We haven't kind of gotten into the minutia of that, but they would be very complimentary to the new Sheraton hotel rooms.
So they would remain hotel accommodations.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
by
that-
a legal PUD agreement that's recorded on the property.
Okay,
And
They're
again,
looking-
legally, we would deed restrict these employee units to the town as in perpetuity deed restricted units.
thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? No? All right, thank you very much. All right, is there any public comment on this matter? I can't tell. I couldn't see there is anything.
I don't see any hands raised virtually.
All right. Seeing no public comment, we can proceed to deliberation. So, who has something to say about this? Kathy?
I wanted to like this project. I have an infinite amount of respect for the Sheraton Hotel and their historic restoration work on the hotel building and on the front of the Phoenix Bean. I was well aware in the steaming bean days, I always thought I'd fall through the floor. I know how bad it was. So I really respect all of that work that's done. I respect how the businesses are run and that the employees are well treated.
Thank you.
But I'm really struggling over this big parking ask. I kind of feel regret that I voted in 1993 for that parking agreement, because now it's like the model that you can have a building and have virtually no parking on site. And I do feel that employees have more cars than people realize, or once they settle in. These might not be transitory employees in your housing. And I think it's really, really important that we have a parking spot for each employee unit. I think that the design could be reconsidered so that, I want to get the names right, Hotel Suite 1 would become smaller. You would relocate the stairs behind the existing parking spot and make the current stairwell, the secondary stairwell, a new parking spot, and it would all work out. It would just shrink one. And you'd have to redesign, but you could still have 2-bedroom units upstairs above it. That's really important. In my heart of hearts, I wouldn't do the extra height. I wouldn't do, I would probably want 4 parking spaces on site, 2 tandem deep spaces. But for me, I'm willing to compromise that there's 2 parking spaces on site for the employees. And I think we're a ways away from people giving up cars. I'd like to think we'll all have fewer cars by 2030, but I don't think that's going to happen. And I just think it's really important that, and I would also like to speak very strongly. I live in the G zone. I have a G permit. I'm older. Sometimes my legs aren't working well and I have to do stuff downtown. And I drive to park in the G zone along Columbia between Fur and Aspen and on the side streets. In the daytime, I can never find a parking space on those blocks. Never, ever. It's really frustrating. And I have to, go somewhere else in order to get close enough to where I'm trying to deliver something or pick something up. So I maybe at 10 o'clock at night, when the hotel guests are in their beds, there's plenty of parking. But my experience, at least once a week, I'm trying to find parking on, in that area that's right by the Sheridan. And I cannot find an open spot unless it's deep off season. So I think there's a bigger G permit problem than I realized. And so I work a lot at Society Turn Business Center. Sometimes I'm coming back in town just in time for a meeting like here. I have to go all the way to my house and park my car to find a space and then come back down to the meeting. So I totally disagree. My parking experience on a regular basis is there is no parking on Columbia between even going all the way to Townsend and all the way to Pine and in the blocks above and below Columbia in that section, which is where your guests are competing to park and your employees will be competing to park. So I am reluctantly supporting the staff proposed motion because I would really rather see more parking than just 2 spaces in this project.
I'm in very much general agreement with everything that Kathy has said. I'm wondering if we and or the applicant can conceive of a way to purchase a dedicated parking space for the second unit, not on site, but within the walking distance. I know, I'm not going to suggest we put it in the Silverjack building, but there are places where parking exists in existing buildings that may be purchased by the applicant and dedicated to this so that there are 2 dedicated spots for the affordable housing units. It's a different way to skin the cat maybe, but outside of that, I'm okay with the height variance and I'm okay with getting it down to 2 on-site or dedicated parking spots.
Other thoughts?
Well, I think it hinges on we don't really favor long-term units not getting a parking space, if that's even true in residential situations. I can see where thank you for providing some of the study, the 60-40 and the flip, that kind of an interesting statistic factoid, but the commercial space requirement, it is in our code. However, once you park on Main Street or find a parking space, people don't lose it, or, they don't they leave their car there and they don't move because they'll lose it. So, and generally walk the entire street. That's under a park once kind of concept. Of course, there's always car handling as well, and we have transportation provided, but I guess the G permit, I would feel more comfortable with not having a space provided if there was one of those 26 that was dedicated to that second unit, accommodations unit. I don't know if that's good enough.
They get one
I don't
anyway.
think so. It's just a hunting
They
permit.
get one.
Exactly, right,
They're gonna get
Um,
one anyway as a renter.
right.
So
So, yeah, so that doesn't satisfy it, is my point, and my mental deliberations here. So I'm struggling as well. I don't think that the commercial, like I said, will really need one, but I do think that people need a place if once they're settled in, they need a place to be. And if you can work out an arrangement like Todd is suggesting, that sounds fine to me. You have some serious constraints with the rear of that building, trying to figure it out. And I do want to say thank you for not building on top of, as everyone else seems to do, a historic building with a gable roof. It does make a difference, I think, but I think perhaps look into what Kathy's saying. I'm just not comfortable either with I don't want the choice to be, oh, well, then we'll just only be able to provide one unit, because I think it is important to have given, your staffing needs. I think that's what you're trying to work out, and we would appreciate that in the long run. So if there's some wiggle room here, I think that's what you should try to work on.
Charles and Lee Shay.
You go ahead. I've already.
I was gonna
Talk
say,
to
I struggle with the same concept, being a local and living in town. I have a W permit, but I work at the G, and there's farmers markets, there's gonna be the Voodoo, there's gonna be the Ajax, there's street closures, there's construction. I think that as a local, it's really important to have a spot that you can come home to and always have a spot. I do actually kind of like the idea of the 26 hotel units, foregoing one of those for a local, because they are constantly used every day. So I know they don't want to revisit it, or maybe it's not recommended, but I think that is a good solution. Todd's point of trying to find another one, that's just trading places for somebody else that also needs it. So I do actually lean towards the visitors that come in the winter and that don't use, they always come in on the shuttles, because once you get here, all you want to do is ski. I do like that idea. I like the idea of supporting locals in their ability to live here. So that's how I kind of am leaning towards that, is definitely supporting those local housing parking spots and some constraint of.
So just to be clear, I think what we've been told, and staff, please correct me if the applicant misstated something, but what the applicant said was that the affordable housing renters would get a G permit by virtue of renting an apartment in town. So we may think we're doing something by taking away a G permit from a hotel guest, maybe we are, but not much, right? I mean, we're not giving this person a parking place. We're giving, and let me just say, as somebody who also I live on Columbia at Pine, and there is no parking on my street ever.
Yeah.
Ever.
Not when you
Maybe
need
early
it.
in the morning. But the parking situation is not easy. And I am very glad that I was forced to build off-street parking, because now I can't place to park. And we've seen this situation recently with the construction of I think it was the Voodoo, where the marshal's office took away some parking spaces.
Yeah.
And everybody who lived in the building that wasn't required to build them parking spaces, but of course they had parking permits, was here telling us how much they needed those 6 parking spaces. And there's a shortage of parking in town,
On the
and there's a shortage
construction.
of street spaces.
And yet the
Takes up a
parking
lot.
structure is half empty that we built. because it's underground and nobody wants to go underground
And they don't want to pay.
Or pay for parking.
or pay. That's right. They're gonna change the payment system, I guess, but I mean,
So I don't think this is I tend to agree with Kathy that if we're going to have people living in these apartments, they need a place to come home to and park. And it should be on site. It should not be far away so that, they have to lug their groceries in the rain or whatever.
that's more of a privilege than I have at Viking, I can tell you that. We don't get to use our, we will lose our parking space if we move, because there's 62 units and there's only 41 parking spaces. That was built originally as a hotel. And you move it's a hunt there as well.
But Angela, I think that would not be approved today, or at least it wouldn't.
Oh, no, of course not.
Right.
But
Kathy.
it just points out that it's townwide.
Scarcity.
Regardless.
I have brought it up in some of our long range or informal discussions. I really wonder, I would keep wanting to look at the PUD benefit list because I really wonder how many more hotel units this community needs until we make a big dent in employee housing because we're so short on workers. So to me, that's not the sacred benefit that it was maybe 5 years ago. I also, I'm a landlord. I live in one unit. There's 3 units around me. There's 9 people. We all work in this community. I don't charge market rates. We have 10 vehicles. I'm the guilty person with 2 vehicles, but every single one of my employees has a vehicle. And I have 6 parking spaces, which is more than zoning requires on my sites. One of them right now is not available due to the construction. But your employees are going to have, your employees, when they become long-term, dedicated, essential employees, are going to have a vehicle. The other bad thing when you have a G parking permit and you're parked on the street, every so often you have to move for snow shoveling. Now it's probably the day you have a double shift, and you have to dig your car out. You have to move it to someplace else that's not getting shoveled that day or the next day. It always snows a whole lot. So I really think it's torturing our employees when we have them only have permits and they have to shovel their car out at very awkward times and move it. So I think in the long range of your need to recruit great employees and retain great employees, that having 2 parking spaces and a 1 smaller hotel suite unit will be a benefit.
Charles, did you have something?
I would just say, I think we're kind of saying it's just one, we're only fighting over 1 parking space, but it's 5 space.
It's 5 spaces.
There are 5 spaces are what was really required, and you're going to have 3 more hotel guests than you do now. So that is going to be 3 more people in the G area that were not, or 2, or however many up to 60, 40%, whatever. But there's going to be more people parking in the G area. So
On the hunt.
yes, on the hunt. So I'm more in favor of what, I think everyone else has been saying is 2 spaces are what we really should have for the affordable housing units. I think we're just pushing one problem, affordable housing, and creating another problem with parking, which I think some people would say parking is just the biggest problem as affordable housing, but so anyway, I think I'm just in agreement with what everybody said.
I would also say that nobody has mentioned so far, so I'll mention that this motion would not require you to provide the commercial parking space, which would normally be required. Now you have a restaurant, so it's not required because we want to incentivize restaurants. Any other commercial use would normally require that employee get a parking space at their place of work, or one employee get their parking space on site. So we are, I don't think it's good that we are going down to 2 parking spaces. I would actually like 3, 1 for the employee who's working there. But I see the benefit of this project. And so I would be willing to go with the staff's proposed 2 parking spaces for the folks who are living there and let the people who are working have to hunt around with their permits. Yes, Sharon.
I'm sorry to ask you to back up. Our stairwell isn't even at the width of a parking spot. So even if we moved the stairwell into the footprint, we still don't have the width for 2 parking spots and an exit out back.
How
Because of the.
big are they? 10 by 20?
No, a parking spot is 8 by 18.
18.
We do
Okay.
not have another, even if we pushed that stairwell into the living space, there's still not 8 feet for a second parking spot. You
Oh.
cannot have 2 parking spots, the existing stairwell and an exit along the back. We had 25 feet, it came down to 19 feet, we lost 8. So with a 3-foot exit, you can't exit into a parking spot. Like, you can't have a door open into a car. You need to have a clear 3-foot width out to the alley. So I just wanted to point that out, that you can't have an exit on the alley and 2 parking spots with this existing stair.
Great.
And that was something that we tried to explain. So I'm sorry to have you open this all back up, but I just wanted to throw that out there so you understood. There's no way you could have an exit at the back. Unless this was a condo, a residential unit that only needed 1 exit, you cannot have this be a hotel, an exit at the back and 2 parking spots.
Kathy.
I was hoping that the math would barely work, 8 and 8 plus 3 is 19, but I guess with a wall. But maybe there could be a railing between the parking and the,
It needs to be
And
at
that-
least a 2-hour rated.
well,
construction. So I need.
but if you have your 2-hour wall is where the flood wall is and everything's outside. And there's only a railing between the other stairway that's going up at a
That's a
different
flood
level.
wall. There's a flood wall there that comes up. That's a 10-inch wide
Okay.
concrete flood wall that comes. I've been out there with a measuring tape many times, down to the inch, and I cannot get it to work. So I just wanted to
Okay.
tell you how.
I have
the rest
always
is.
been a big proponent of tandem parking. And that the 2 employees can work out who's parked in. Again, you could leave your stairs where you are. You would just be putting a parking, you would be redesigning. I'm pretty sure you can redesign hotel suite number 1 to be smaller and have 2 on-site parking spaces.
I think at that point you would have 50% more circulation space, if not 75. I mean, it would be ridiculous, the amount of parking and circulation. It would be a nothing unit. I mean, it would be so small. I'm not sure.
Well, I don't know, like I think I've said, for me, hotel units are not the big need in our community. So let's have 2 hotel units.
Yeah, we are not
I wouldn't
architects and
change
we're
the
not here to,
calculation. I think 3 hotel units require 2 parking spaces, so I think decreasing a hotel unit would not change that mix.
That
right?
ratio?
She would be able to then have parking and I don't know what you would do with the rest of the
we're
space.
already not requiring you to have those 2 hotel units, the 2 hotel parking spaces. We're generally saying you don't have to have those parking spaces on site. So whether it's 2 hotel rooms or 3 hotel rooms, there are only 2 hotel spaces. I think this board is generally moving towards not requiring you to have those parking spaces on this property. So it doesn't matter from our point of view, whether they're 3 or 2 hotel units.
Can you discuss whether or not the change from restaurant to commercial should in fact trigger a parking spot, or is there any flexibility there?
We didn't,
Doesn't.
it doesn't, we are not,
Unfortunately, we're bound by the code. I would
But
suggest it
still
doesn't, but
Goes toward the count of 5 required.
Yeah, and we're not requiring you to have 3
Right.
parking spaces, which would be the case if there was 1 for each living unit, if 2 affordable housing units, and 1 for the commercial. So we're saying, okay, you don't have to have 1 for the commercial. You didn't have 1 for the restaurant. So we're, I think, generally moving towards giving you that ask.
Oh, I thought we were adding the 1 for the commercial.
We did, that's part of the 5.
I know, and we're saying you only have to have 2. So you get away with 3, not
They
having
exempt
3.
us for the commercial then.
they're buying out 1. You know, I
They're
think
not
what.
exempt. They're considering to reduce it through the PUD process.
I think what you're not hearing was what's important to our board is the 2 employee units of the 957 square feet. I might have that number quite wrong, and 2 parking spaces for them. However many hotel units you get, no more than 3, but if there's 2, we don't care. Whatever, if you want to come back with a proposal that's, 2 spaces on site, the employee units that are this size are larger, and ask to only and have 2 parking spaces waived and not have to buy one, I would consider that, but I want 2 parking spaces on site and I want 2 employee units.
I know it's kind of informal to have this dialogue, but like what would the board consider Todd's suggestion of another
Yeah,
dedicated?
That's the part I was just gonna chime in. It's as 1C. Physical on-site, and here's my just a suggested consideration, or off-site parking in accordance with the land use code shall be provided for each unit. And then that way we can look to see, can we find an off-site space that meets the code requirement? And then we're not so locked into on-site, and that gives us a little bit more flexibility.
I'm all right with that.
I would accept that as long as it's 365 days a year, they don't have
Oh,
to move.
understood.
And it's
Yeah.
like for 100 years, not 20 years or 15 years and it's run out and
Right.
it's all free. I want it to be forever.
So does your, what is your wording, and does
It would
it,
be physical on-site or off-site parking in accordance with the land use code.
so you still are providing one on-site parking place?
No,
And a
it's physical
second.
on-site or off-site parking, not,
No,
not in a right of way. Being in a garage as allowed by the land use code, because there is a land use code allowance for off-site parking. That's not in a right of way, that could be in a private garage.
Did you want to say something, Phil?
I can read that requirement from the land use code if you guys
Thank
are
you.
interested
That
in
would be
it.
very helpful.
So this is section 3-109, characteristics of off-street parking spaces. It says parking required for a use in the, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, in the historic commercial zone district shall not be located in an adjacent residential zone district. So they could not go into the residential district to the north. And then it says, in addition to the above required, parking for a use located in the historic commercial districts may be provided on abutting lots, provided such parking is secured in perpetuity through a recorded easement or other document acceptable to the town attorney and planning director.
So that says in perpetuity.
But abutting lots,
That's very limited, but yes.
Well, if that helps you, but I think you'd still provide one, you're still agreeing to provide one parking space on the property.
Oh, yes, it's just to have that option to look to see, is there an option to look on an abutting lot to provide parking? It's a little bit more of a wiggle room where we've just got to sit down as a team and figure out, based on what your action is today, does this work?
Charles?
Can I just clarify what Kathy, you said, 2 affordable housing units? If they were to, instead of 2 housing units, build 970 square feet of one affordable housing unit, and then they would only need 1 parking spaces, is that something we would be acceptable to, or are we feeling like we want two units
Yeah.
or units?
I think 2 units are bigger, filling a bigger need. I also don't see how they could do 1 900.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
it's a-
3-bedroom unit without totally destroying some of their other goals.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think we all really like the fact that they're not going on top of the historic building, that they're respecting that and not, building on top of it like we see so often.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm also bringing that up because it looks like in our conditions for the motion, it just says 997 square feet of affordable housing.
That we
As
should
opposed
say
to
we
two
should
does not say
divided into
2 units
We should
with-
say 2 units
we-
consisting of
we
900.
should-
So,
Right.
yep, you're right. That's a good point. Yeah, that's in B. All right, so let's look through the conditions. So C, we would consider revising as physical on-site parking or Bill, what's some good language here to capture the
Could
parking
be
in accordance?
physical on-site parking shall be provided for 1 affordable housing, and then the part about off-site according to the land use code.
1 or 2 should be provided on site with the option of 1 being provided on a budding property.
No, it's
Does
just say in accordance with the land use code.
With accordance with the land use code. Okay.
Right, that,
Does that satisfy?
Yep, that's fine.
And what does the land use code provision?
Though it's section 3109A.
3109A. All right,
Madam Chairman,
yes,
if we could, there's a few moving parts here that our team, including the Steinbergs, need to chat through with this. Could we respectfully request a continuance of this matter to your next meeting? And that just gives us a chance to kind of recircle the wagons and make a decision. on
I think
it.
you've
So-
heard that we really want one parking place.
Oh,
to-
loud and clear. I got
Great.
that right after Kathy spoke. I knew which way this was going.
Okay,
So-
I have a question. Can you be ready in basically 30 days or less than 30 days? Because we're meeting late.
Yes, yes, we
Okay.
can. I don't know if we'll have the ultimate answer, but at least we've had a chance to talk with the Steinbergs and come to some decision or direction on this. And we might have some, we can explore these options. So put it that way.
Okay,
Todd
so
has a question.
Todd, yes.
And for our discussion, while the land use code says abutting properties, I'd be willing to go wider than that. As long as it's still,
I agree
Yeah.
with that.
We
you
can
know,
talk about how close it needs to be.
yeah.
Well, I think it would help them if that is, I mean, that is, I guess my question is, does it have to be abutting or is there a wiggle room that we can say?
We can say whatever we want, as long as it doesn't say in accordance with the land use code exactly. It
Okay.
says something,
Okay,
then we can define what the property is. We can do
Okay.
what we want. in this
Gotcha.
motion. All right, so are we prepared to continue this? All right, pursuant to the applicant's request, I move that we continue this to the PNC meeting of, what's our next date?
September 22nd.
September 22nd, 2022. Do I have a second?
Second,
Discuss it.
Do we need to provide direction in the motion?
We heard your comments.
I
loud
know,
and-
but I
oh,
don't
sorry.
know technically if the continuance.
Piper, do you need more information for continuance?
Well, so for the record, anything that you don't say in the motion isn't
Recorded.
right, well, not legal, but like.
Isn't.
Well,
So-
it's fine though. It's fine. The applicants know what they're.
The direction we provided.
Motion will just say to continue to this date.
Yeah, you're not providing them direction at this point. You provided them comments and feedback, but if you'd like to make it formal as part of a motion, you can. Or we can just leave this at the continuance, and I think they've heard you. They understand what your concerns are. so
I'd be
it's up to
comfortable
you.
leaving it as a continuance.
Okay.
So thank you very much for your time tonight.
We
It
have
was
to
very
vote. Wait a
helpful.
second.
have to
Stop
vote.
one second.
Okay, yeah.
Do we have a second on the motion?
yes.
Todd, all in favor? Yes, that was unanimous. All right. the-
Thank you.
I was-
Very good discussion.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
Sorry. that motion, but
I was looking.
so we have we have,
Thank you, Ally.
does anybody need a break now? Should we take a 2-minute break?
Let's take it like a
Take a
3-minute.
2-minute. Pee, eat dinner, whatever you want to do. Get ready for our next. Yeah. How was the tomato soup?
They were,
Oh, yeah, it might not be.
Oh. Something else.
Smells like sort of struck on that.
Maybe
Chicken.
upstairs.
which was good too.
Oh, the, there's are upstairs. We
Yeah.
can't rack it, so.
Grilled cheese goes best with.
Yeah.
Smells sulfur, something was struck in there. Upstairs.
You don't, nobody but me. There must be a witch in the room.
Doing what?
Huh?
What was it, which shirt?
Oh, I smell sulfur.
Oh, well, I heard the
Like it's-
pinging. There's a ping, 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 ping. Did anybody else? know? Thank goodness.
Oh, my.
Sure, formal break.
Oh, yeah, oh, sorry, yeah.
Taking a break.
I was afraid the building was burning down. That was my rationale.
Well, don't get me started. Oh, no, we were just earlier talking about how close town hall is to burning down.
With electrical issues or something.
No. But nobody else smells it with me, but me, so. Never mind.
Chocolate the tree.
So I guess we have to go eat at the Phoenix in the next like couple of weeks. Before I close it down. Yeah.
It's the best deal.
Bill?
Okay.
Yep.
Resume?
Sorry.
All right, resuming our meeting. We're now on the work session, where we're going to talk about community vision and action plan. Ron?
So, thank you. Sure.
Do we have anyone online by chance? No?
Not anymore.
Okay.
Okay, good. I didn't see anybody up there. So I just looked.
So we thought we'd put this on the agenda as a work session item. Design workshop provided this PowerPoint. I'm not going to go into detail on each slide because they're going to do that at the next meeting next week. But I'd like to kind of go over some of it for your information. Both Phil and I have tag team on this one. So let me just skip to the second slide. Where we are in this process, it started with phase one. We've accomplished phase one. And for the most part, we've accomplished phase two. Where we are is at the stage of a facilitated action planning retreat that we're going to hold next week.
The retreat will be at the AHA meeting facility. Where is that located? I've never been. up there.
Upstairs.
It's on the third floor.
Third floor?
Mhm.
Okay. In the afternoon or all day, actually. Morning and afternoon. Before that, happens on the 8th. Planning consultants will be meeting various locations throughout town. To hold what they're calling coffee talks. And they'll set up, it's similar to the pop-up events that occurred last month. They're for the purpose of gaining additional input from the public in an informal kind of setting. And then that afternoon, on September 7th, an open house is scheduled at the transfer warehouse. And the next day, an all-day retreat. So that's where we are in the process. Some of the results.
We have some questions. Kathy.
What time is the open house at the transfer?
4:30 to 6.
And
Yes,
Gabby,
seven.
we would encourage us to go.
Yeah, you're certainly welcome.
And this is.
Anyone
this
and
is-
everyone's welcome.
This is on Wednesday,
Yes.
right when,
Yeah.
right when the Ecology Commission is scheduled to meet?
The consultants are only here for 2 days and one is a full day retreat. So that was when there was availability.
I've done it earlier.
So the open house is on the 7th.
Right, Wednesday.
And that's really for the general public, for the most part. I mean,
Well, I still feel like P and Z is being excluded.
So do you want to answer, Kathy? I'm sorry, I had a question.
I don't agree with that. I think we're trying to include you in this process every step of the way. And an all-day retreat, the next day is going to be very important for the consultant. Their scheduled open house and coffee talks are intended to be an outreach to the general public to gain more input. into
So
the
we could
process.
also go to the coffee talks and just see what people have to say.
You could, yeah. And again,
Will you-
it's-
Is there a schedule for those online somewhere?
So it's designed to be pretty informal. I think we're gonna be set up in 2 locations throughout town. The first one will be in or around Shandoka somewhere. And then I think the second one will be either at the community table on Main Street, Colorado Avenue, or somewhere sort of in that general vicinity. But they're pretty informal. We don't have like a set location or time. I believe the applicants will be in, or the consultants will be in town around 11 o'clock. Hope to set up the first one around 11:30 at near Shandoka, and then work our way towards closer to the transfer warehouse for the open house that starts at 4:30.
So the all-day retreat is going to be important for the P and Z, and of course, it's also the, town council joint meeting. Or they're invited to be a part of that, as well as the working group and the stakeholders that participated in previous meetings. Just a brief summary of the survey results. They actually obtained 1,142 responses, which is pretty unbelievable.
That's almost half the community.
Well,
Or,
about 46% are actually,
tell you right,
Town
there I
resident.
see that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
or 53%. Yeah. And we received 141 participants in the pop-up event activity as well. I'm gonna skip through some of these. Again, these are some of the details that they're gonna provide at the work, the retreat. They identified some pillars, I guess. Let me get to that. So some of the pieces that will fit together once they get beyond the visioning and more towards the action part of this plan. they've identified what they're calling a livable telluride and principles of livability, which will lead to the strategic action. Principles of livability, or which really are the pillars of the plan, are housing for all, a thriving workforce, locally scaled transportation, sustainable environment, and a creative economy. Everything that was obtained through the vision process in some way is directly related to each of these, what they're calling pillars. And I can stop here and get your input as to whether you think these are adequate, or do you think there's a pillar that's being left out of this process?
Can I just ask a sort of preamble question, which is threshold question? How were these, so what did they do with the surveys to arrive at these principles? Just read them? Was
Yeah,
there some?
And it's kind of, we're in the middle, or we're in the process where they're obtaining the final analysis, I guess. They'll have a report ready by the mid part of this week that we're going to distribute to everyone. And that will be used as part of the process for next week.
So then we'll have some numbers.
Yeah.
How many
we'll
people
have
answered this
different-
versus that, right?
Yeah, the goal is to have the final survey results, like the synthesized data, sent out to everyone prior to the retreat.
Awesome.
Yes.
When you talk to them, have them provide some more words around the difference between a thriving workforce and a creative economy. They could be interpreted to be very much the same thing. And from what we were getting from the public, I think they mean the creative economy is an economy built around the creative arts, but
More like all arts and culture than.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
I
as
think,
opposed to-
but
Yeah.
I don't want to put words in their mouth.
I assume the climate action part of our community or our goals goes under sustainable environment, but we might want stronger words there, whether like we want to be carbon neutral or what's the better term than that, Todd?
Well, we've got a climate action plan, but yes, it does sit within that.
But I mean, it's kind of buried, so I think we need to name a sustainable environment to a sustainable carbon neutral environment. Or something like that, because I think we're gonna have a certain element of our community screaming otherwise, and it's really important.
And just hold in mind that these are what they drew out of the input to the survey. And it's going to be a recommendation to us and council, and we put our own words on it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, there also
Well,
might be
fun.
things that, people don't always want what they need.
Yep.
And the survey measured what people want.
Yep.
And there may be some things that we need to add that we need, that people didn't ask for. Maybe they
Or
don't
didn't
even
think
want.
about, for whatever reason.
So again, next week, we invite you to be a part of the process. The open house and coffee talks, again, that's intended for the general public, and it's kind of a fluid kind of process. And then the retreat, where you'll be directly involved with the consultants. They will be in town. So our P and Z agenda, I'm going to pull that up.
Would you like me to pull it up?
It's from
Yeah.
9 to 12 and lunch break 12 to 1 and 1 to 4 is action planning. Morning is introductions. First draft vision, define the vision. First
yeah.
draft key
And
principles.
if you have the opportunity between now and then, relook at the Park City vision,
Okay.
because you can see where this is going, and you can see how they turned it into elements that are in their, well, not only actionable, but in their code.
Kathy's looking at it.
And follow, what's the next step after the retreat? How does the retreat, what does the retreat lead to?
So there is another meeting with Planning and Zoning Commission directly. So there is they're calling it meeting number 3. So that would be scheduled either September 22nd or October. Whatever that means in October.
So I think the main things that are gonna come out of the vision retreat are, we're gonna craft some vision statements. Okay, the goal is one vision statement out of that. And after that, we'll sort of all get to a consensus on what are principles of livability for town. We'll use some of those results from the survey to either write our new categories or tweak the ones that we just showed you. Most likely we'll write new ones is my guess. After that, we're gonna, an action plan. We're gonna try to figure out what actionable things can happen to sort of encourage these principles into the future or make sure that they stay principles of livability moving forward. So I think after this retreat, we're gonna have, again, we're gonna try to get some principles figured out, vision statements, and then an action plan. That's sort of the end goal, is a action plan.
And so one of the things that will happen is that the consultants will meet with us one more time in order to work on that.
Yes.
Do we care? Does anybody care which meeting it's at? September, October?
I think their preference is October. They want-
They're October, that seems,
It's the 27th, I believe,
I think you're right.
4th.
I personally don't care. But let's do it when they're ready.
Yeah.
a regular meeting would be the 27th, yes.
So again, we're gonna have a good summary, community engagement summary that finalizes some of the findings of the survey. Puts it all in graphic format, tabular format. And makes it a little bit clearer as to what the preferences are for the community. We're looking forward to seeing that.
Shortly.
Yes,
Probably
we
by
reviewed a draft
Wednesday.
and sent them comments, went through the comments with them. So that was last
Good.
Thursday.
Yeah.
We requested some pretty substantial changes to how the data was being presented. So, yes, they're working on that and we'll have a final version for us pretty soon.
Like Thursday or something.
Wednesday or Thursday.
Great.
That'll come email.
Ron's gonna send it out.
Is it safe to say that there are no big surprises? Nobody wants to turn us into Dallas or
Yeah.
No, I think it's safe to say
Austin,
that everyone's highest priority is affordable housing. When you take the top response off all the questions,
Yep.
the data becomes a little more interesting.
A little more interesting,
Yeah.
sure. Yes.
Good. Anything else, Ron?
No.
All right. So now we'll stay there because somebody has to talk about land use code amendments. Is that you or Phil?
Yeah, we brought this to you back in June. I think it was June 23rd, P&Z meeting. We wanted to bring this back to you, just to update you where we are on these changes. These are changes to the land use code as it relates to HARC review and recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Commission. And as it relates to the projects as they're reviewed by HARC. The intent is, so there's 4 different categories of activities that HARC reviews, or the Historic Preservation Department reviews. Either large scale activity, small scale activity, minor activity, or an insubstantial activity. And right now, HARC is backed up 9 months for their meetings, their regular board meetings. The intent is that we modify the code to change the thresholds for what's required for large scale activity that goes to the full hard board. If we can reduce that and take it down to the next level, which is a small scale activity, and also modify some of the small scale down to minor activity and then down to being substantial, then we will reduce that back, that problem with the number of cases waiting to go through the process. And it also makes sense from a standpoint of the code. The other change, the primary change is to remove some of the things that HARC reviews for recommendation to P&Z. A lot of times they're reviewing, for example, the last meeting, they were reviewing this application that was before you tonight and struggling with the fact that they don't really review parking requirements. But that was part of the application, so they were a little bit conflicted. The intent is to remove a lot of the review and recommendation and only establish it for zoning, text amendments or rezonings, or land use text amendments or rezonings that relate to the Telluride Historic Landmark District or to a significant or rated structure, historic structure, rather than reviewing small scale subdivisions, preliminary PUDs and small scale preliminary PUDs. It would focus in on just those things that are important to HARC and as it relates to the historic district. One of the things that they're also looking at, and I thought I'd ask or get your opinion as to if it would also be something that P&Z should consider, is reducing the area that requires or that establishes a conflict of interest. Right now, our code requires a 75-foot in proximity.
For
No,
notice,
well, there's notice and then there's conflict.
No,
They're different.
right?
Conflict.
75.
Is it?
I think
Yeah.
it's 75.
It's 100.
We reduced
Get
it
notice.
about 5 years ago.
Right, from 150.
Yeah. So the intent is, and I mean, it's up to the town council, but they may reduce that down to just simply being in adjacent, either across the right of way or adjacent in proximity, sharing a property line.
And the effect of that was thought to be what?
Well, the intent is that that would encourage that would reduce the number of applications that may create a problem for a quorum to make a decision.
Right.
Town council had to decide at the last meeting an application because they didn't have the adequate quorum because of this problem and number.
Too many HARC members were
Number of
confused. Yeah.
parking.
It doesn't seem to be as common a problem for this board
Right.
as the HARC board, but it is something that's being discussed.
But right now, does HARC have only 4 members or how many members?
Correct.
They,
Four.
they have 4, but they have a 5th that will be considered at the next meeting
Good.
or next town council.
Yeah, and if we can get both boards up to 7, I think 75, we should need to try it out a while longer because I think there's gonna be problems if we go down to your adjacent, because the neighbors are gonna be beating up the one, the HARC member that lives in that block, basically.
The one effect that we reduced that for was that there were, as you say, the proximity was eliminating people from commenting or actually ruling on
Mhm.
on things. But the reverse of that is that people don't know what's going on in the neighborhood. So,
They would still get a
I-
notice, I think.
Those are two
Yeah,
separate.
Yeah.
It'd still be 100.
Still get the
Right.
notice and be able to appear and comment.
No,
but I'm more concerned about the suggestion that people out of our community are allowed on boards.
They can't because of.
Yeah,
or
that-
maybe-
that's
But they're
being
looking at a
discussed.
charter change.
That-
but
That would be a charter change. I think they decided at their last meeting that they wouldn't touch that one yet. So there might be
But
something
I-
to look at.
I missed that because I wasn't listening to all of the meetings, so thank you for filling that in. It wasn't covered in the
And
paper
there,
either, so thank you.
there was a long time ago when we had 3 P and Z members. I was one of them that all lived within 75 feet of each other. I mean, you know, so if there was anything going on in our neighborhood, half the board was automatically disqualified, and certainly within the 150, that was in the 150-foot days. It was
Right.
difficult, but if we can get enough applicants, and then if council can vaguely consider that they're all not living in the same neighborhood, that might work. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Well,
I
yes,
think we just need more people, even if they live in adjacent.
Yeah, right now we need people, period, even if
Yeah.
they're.
It's hard enough to find enough full-time residents who want to stay.
Right. And if you reduce the fact that they, won't go to midnight meetings, then you might have more participation, more willingness.
exactly. So, town council, they considered this, at work session at the last meeting in, this month, September 13th.
No, August 23rd.
I mean, August 23rd. I'm hardly. August 23rd meeting. And they will be considering red line, proposal from staff at the September 13 meeting. Then we propose to bring that to the HARC, for review September 14, and then back, and then to the Planning and Zoning Commission
On the 22nd.
on the 22nd, only as a work session item, just to review the red lines. And then come back in October with proposed ordinance.
So you'll send around the red line at some point ahead of our
Yeah.
meeting.
And that's where we are with that.
Great.
Just
Charles.
another land use, I mean, Kathy brought it up earlier about public benefit. What is a public benefit, and do we need to look at changing that? Is
Well,
that-
for a long time, the hotel, basically hotbeds, was a really big item. That's
Well-
what drove a lot of the Ajax Hotel promotion, or their proposals, I should say.
But
And
there's a bigger issue than just that. It's, should we review PUD benefits sooner than going through the visioning plan to a comp plan to land use code? And I think we need to try to visit PUD benefits, and including hotel rooms or hotbeds as soon as we reasonably can. 'Cause I
So
think
what would that process look like if it's separated from the comprehensive plan?
it's just a land use code amendment.
It'd be, yeah, it's just a legislative, so we'd bring it to you probably in the form of red line changes to the land use code. And it would, we might have 2 or 3 work sessions, before we come to the final language
Okay.
that we recommend to town council.
Yeah, and we probably need one work session where we just look at all the benefits, brainstorm if there's new benefits, new things we need and want to put on the benefit list, and what's on there that's now maybe obsolete or the goal has been met.
yeah, it was part of town council's desire, and maybe that goal in the chapter first changed. Is that what
Yeah.
you're suggesting?
And
That
we
was
do, we do
different-
have.
different
some
council.
other things.
Unfortunately, we have STRs that are effectively serving that need for good or,
Yeah, well, that's
or
part
bad.
of, part of the discussion is
Right.
like, how many rentals do we want, short-term rentals units does our community need, and why should we still be incentivizing them?
We might bring you some other land use code changes as well. I mean, we're looking at several things. So the September workshop or work session may include more than just the HARC changes, but some other changes, and then maybe preliminarily looking at the PUD.
So other.
Apart from the continuation of this matter we heard tonight,
Right.
the rest of our agenda is open for land use code amendments? Or do we have other?
We
Have other
have,
They have other
applications. project
applications.
We
review.
have the follow-up on the visioning, which
Yeah.
we have a
but we have other
tentative fee
applications.
waiver
Yes, we do have one application for
that might be a lot.
for a fee
a
waiver.
waiver to the building permit requirement. But that's the only application. we have.
Okay, so no other big thing.
No,
Great, let's do land use code amendments.
so we'll try to get that in front of you before next meeting.
And what about, I mean, it's looking at a crystal ball, but the October meeting, do we have any pending project review type applications? So we could spend a lot of time both on the visioning plan and on different land use code. For others, the HARC stuff that's more defined or other land use code changes that we'll come up with.
Yes.
Okay,
We can plan that.
Great.
And that's depending on whether
Yeah.
we do or don't receive any other applications.
right.
between
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, it's just, I thought if you had 3 PUDs in waiting, we needed to know that. But if you don't, then we can, our subdivisions, then we can focus more on long range.
TKV may be coming back.
Oh.
What is that?
One
TKV?
next day, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But it'll be a new application because they let everything expire.
Yeah, no, but it may come back by October, so
Okay.
that's one that we could put up
Okay.
as a possibility.
Any other things? Does anybody want to talk about anything else?
I guess the only other thing, in the past, we've always done long range planning first to make sure we got it done and it didn't happen at midnight or get canceled because it was midnight. And we had project review second, but if the project review is going to be straightforward and not have endless
Extended
discussion
discussion.
and lots of people in the audience wanting to comment, maybe we can do them first and get them done, but I really don't want to have all the long range stuff pushed to 8 and 9 o'clock when we get tired.
Well, I think so far that it's been a courtesy to the applicants to let them go first, and it hasn't taken, we haven't gone past 7 o'clock with an application.
We can
So,
start the
But
meeting.
then we have more open discussion after the advantage.
the
is
meeting
you
earlier?
can Go as long as
Right,
you
we
want.
could. I mean, Art starts their meeting at 5:30. Or 5:30.
We tried that, it didn't work very well.
Okay.
I was unable to be on time
Yeah.
personally.
Sometimes working.
All right, any other comments, questions? All right, it is 8:03 and I adjourn this meeting by unanimous consent.
Right.
Um,